Great. Welcome, everybody, to the restoration webinar. We are going to go through a series of slides initially today. We're going to help provide some context on how we got to where we are today, why we changed the application, how we did it, what changed and what didn't from a high level, and then what offerings this is applicable to. We are going to spend most of the time in the restoration application, walking you through all the different changes that we did. And then along the way, providing some tips and tricks for submitting competitive applications. So let's go ahead and get started. So why did we change the application? We have been hearing from folks that our applications are long, sometimes repetitive and redundant, sometimes lack clarity in the question or in the guidance. And to be honest, we couldn't agree more. And this application has been online since 2016. We haven't really done any substantial changes since then. And so now was a perfect time to take a deeper dive into how we can actually, streamline the application, make things more clear, provide some better guidance. And so that's what was the basis for what we and how we approached it. Another thing too is we've been collecting metrics at time of application, and we don't necessarily need the metrics during the review process. And so just removing the metrics alone almost cut the application in half. And we'll get to a little bit later in the presentation what those metrics are. But essentially removing those metric questions just automatically trim the application pretty considerably. Now, if your project does get funded and you do have a connection with an anadromous species, there is a potential that you'll have to report metrics once the board makes the award of your grant. And OWEB is in the process of developing a database that you'll get access to input those metrics. So more to come on that later. But it felt pretty good to remove those metric questions, and it certainly removed a lot of questions in the application. Anything that I missed, Liz, or you want to touch on here?
Nope, you're good to go.
Okay. So how did we do the change? There was a group of us at OWEB that sat around the table and went through this. We also had a review team member participate with us. We met over the course of maybe 10 times in 2023. And really what we did is we would print out the entire application, including the guidance. We would sit around a table or sit around a Zoom room, and we would go through each question along with our evaluation criteria that you see in the upper left-hand corner, and then our Oregon administrative rules that you see here in the upper right-hand corner. We would go through each question and say, do we still need this question? Does it still make sense? Can we provide better guidance? Is it in the right position in the application? Meaning, is it the right flow? Is it in the right spot of the application? And it was pretty exhilarating to go through this process and look through and find out ways where, boy, this question doesn't really make sense, or this guidance is not necessarily really clear, or maybe this question would fit better in this part of the application. So it was a pretty fun exercise to be able to do that. And I want to stress the importance that we had our criteria, we had the administrative rule. So whatever changes we made sure that they were still in line with what our criteria says and what is in rule, to make sure that our application was representative of those two. Once we got to a good space, we did a pretty exhaustive round of testing. So we had internal folks at OWEB test. We probably had almost half the agency test. And then we asked about a dozen external folks to do testing. And we got some wonderful feedback from folks, both internal and external, that we actually did some modifications based on that testing. Anything you want to mention here, Liz?
Nope, you covered everything.
Okay. This is just a reminder about what OWEB can fund. Because we use Measure 76 funds that are obligated through the lottery, they have some pretty specific and strict requirements, and those are on the left side of your screen. So engaging folks in voluntary restoration has to have a fish and wildlife or water quality benefit. Um, and so this is just a reminder that this is what we are obligated to spend our funds on, and that's the bar and threshold that we are looking for. So I can't stress more that your project has to have that direct fish, wildlife, water quality benefit. And there's a great question that we put in the application to help you kind of flush out what those benefits are specific to what we can fund. Here at OWEB. Anything you want to mention, Liz?
Nope, you covered that perfectly.
Okay. Okay, so now let's get to the fun stuff. So what changed and what didn't? So what changed is we changed three parts of the application: the problem statement section, the proposed solution section, and the wrap-up section. And so I would consider this to be kind of the core part of the application. These parts of the application are specific to the offering. And so we're going to walk through all those sections in a little bit. So what we didn't change is we didn't change the administrative section. So that's where you put in your abstract. That's where you identify permits, identify insurance, identify racial equalities. We didn't change the budget page, and we didn't change the funding and match page. And I think you might be thinking, why did not change the budget page? The budget page is a little clunky. It's a little tough to work through, and we certainly acknowledge that. And we are going to change those things. We just couldn't do it yet. These sections of the application, the administrative, budget, funding, match, they touch every single offering that OWEB pushes out the door. So there's a much larger reach with these sections of the application. And when it comes to the budget page and funding and match page, there's a lot of IT and coding behind the scenes. And so we just didn't have the time to do it right. And so what we did have the time to do were these sections up above that we're going to focus on today. So that is to say, stay tuned on these additional sections. It's on our radar, and we hope to get to them very soon. Anything to add on here, Liz?
Nope.
Okay. So what offerings is this applicable to? So right now, it's just for the open solicitation offering. So I talked a little bit about a metrics database being created. And so that will be finished by the fall of 2024. And so it's likely that OWEB will use these Streamline applications for other offerings the agency puts out. But until that metrics database gets completed, we can't allow other grant types within OWEB to use these streamlined applications. So right now, it's only for open solicitation. And I really just want to mention that because some of you all might be working in the FIT program or other programs at OWEB. And we just want to reiterate that right now it's just for open solicitation, but I can certainly see other grant programs at OWEB utilizing these applications into the future.
We have a question in chat about did we just change the restoration application? And I think just as a good point to explain that we changed the restoration, the technical assistance, the monitoring, and the engagement. So the four grant types. And they will be used by open solicitation right now. They'll be the first offerings to use it.
Super.
And we also have trainings for each of those types. So we did technical assistance last week, and that is available on the website as on YouTube. And then we have the remaining application trainings coming up in the next few weeks.
Yeah. And then after these webinars, the following week, we're putting on office hours for anybody to come and ask us additional questions or seek some additional clarity on project types they're thinking about. Okay, are we good to go to the next slide?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I think we're going to go ahead and get to... Oh, did somebody have something they were wanting to say? Just... Okay. We are going to get to the restoration application. So I'm going to stop sharing this presentation. I'm going to bring up the online application, and we're going to walk through it just like you would if you were applying for this particular grant offering. After we go through the sections in the application that we changed, I'm going to come back and I have a couple more slides just to wrap us up on. So bear with me here as I stop sharing the PowerPoint and I share the online application. So Liz, I'm just going to check with you that you see the
We
application.
can we can see your application.
Okay. Don't let the red text with the wrong date fool you. This is just our testing login. And so just ignore that. When you are logged in, it will say April 29th, 2024 at 5 p.m. And so this is after you've logged in, after you've selected that you want to open up a grant in open solicitation, and after you've selected the restoration grant offering, you will come to this page. Before I go on from this page, there's a couple things I want to reiterate. One, you cannot clone the cycle because the application version is new. If you were to clone from an older application, you wouldn't get the most current version, and the system will only allow you to submit the most current version. So you cannot clone this cycle. You will be able to clone into the future, but not right now. I also want to just highlight there is in the upper right-hand corner a feedback button. There is a group of folks at OWEB that review the feedback monthly. If you click the feedback button, you can type whatever kind of feedback you want. Like there's a content issue, I don't understand something. There's a functionality issue, hey, this isn't working for me. Go ahead and submit that. And like I said, there's a group of folks that look at this feedback on a monthly basis to troubleshoot whatever issues folks are having. I'll also just remind people that up here in this section is called templates. If you click the templates, you're going to get every offering that OWEB has ever put out, and it can be a little convoluted. But I want to emphasize that if you are looking for the template to this application, you need to ensure that you select the version restoration under slash V2. That means version 2. That is the application that we're going to be talking through today. This restoration that has nothing next to it is our old version of the application. This is still up there because there are other offerings at OWEB utilizing this particular application. So anybody in open solicitation, make sure that you download the version 2 template. And so you'll see it for restoration, you'll see it for technical assistance, you'll see it for monitoring. And then if you were to scroll up, you'd also see it for engagement. Okay, I'm going to go back to my application and never mind all the applications that we have. And I'm sorry, I'm scrolling and making you dizzy early in the morning. There we go. Okay, so like I stated earlier, we focused our changes on the problem statement, the proposed solution, and the wrap-up. We did not change the administrative section. We did not change the optional monitoring section, and we didn't change budget, funding and match, road, plant, permit pages. So all those I think will be part of a next version of OWEB making application modifications. But for right now, we didn't change those. So we're going to focus on problem statement, proposed solutions. And so we're just going to walk through these 3 sections today. But as we're going through the application, if you do have a question about another part of the application, do feel free to ask that. So if we click problem statement, you are going to right off the bat know that this used to be 2 questions, and now we've concised it into 1. And so there are a couple things that I want to emphasize here. One is when you're articulating your problem statement, make sure that you articulate it in a way that's emphasizing the problem at your specific project site. Now, I think it's important to have some context about your problem, but don't elaborate or spend too much time on telling us, what happened in the 18 and early 1900s and I think you can dilute the message that you're trying to get at, which is the specific problem at your problem site. And so, we had two questions here. Now they're down to 1. That was a way for us to streamline the application. I want to make note that our I buttons here, as you're going through the application, I would encourage everybody click through the I buttons because they've changed considerably. So if we go ahead and click the I button, and Liz, I'm just going to make sure that you see the I button.
I could see your I button.
Okay, super. So every I button is going to have some consistency. That consistency is it's going to identify the specific evaluation criteria that is relevant to this particular question. It is also going to provide you at least one example for an appropriate way to respond to this question. Some I buttons will provide you some pretty high level overview of things to consider. So in this instance, you might be thinking, what are environmental stressors? We provide a definition of what environmental stressors are. One thing I think we like to reiterate here when we're looking at the problem statement is why here and why now? Why is it relevant that you want to do restoration here and for what purpose? And so these are, some things to think about, but I would highly encourage as you go through the application, click through all the I buttons. They've changed considerably. We really tried to make the criteria and the examples specific and relevant to what we're asking in the question. And this is really our hope that as you go through this, it's really clear how you are supposed to respond to the question. So now, there we go. As we're migrating down the project history section, this hasn't changed a whole lot. So there's two sections. One is continuation phase. The next is resubmit. If you go ahead and click continuation phase, if it is, it's going to ask you to identify what OWEB project numbers it's applicable to, and then briefly tell us what was completed. This provides additional context for why you're asking for more money, which is really important for our reviewers to understand as they're just, getting to know your application, getting through the problem statement section of the application. Um, if it is a resubmit, this changed a little bit. And so if it's a resubmit, we're going to ask you to identify the grant numbers. And the reason why we ask you to identify the grant numbers is because before we give the applications to the reviewers, we upload the previous application evaluations. And so that way the review team can see what the evaluations were for previously submitted applications. And it's just a way for them to connect the dots and to be reminded of the previous application that was submitted. So in the old version of the applications, this question was a little bit different. You had a space to go into each, if you clicked yes, it would bring up, problem statement, proposed solutions, and you had an opportunity to identify what changed in each section of the application. And so that kind of got a little, redundant. What we started to see was people telling us everything that they wanted to do and why in this section, which is not what we want. That's later on under proposed solutions. Really, what this question is getting at is what changed and where in the application can I find it? And again, if you look at the I button, it's gonna, kind of tell you, provide that high level summary of what was addressed and where in the application we can find it. And then there's an example as to, kind of what will be considered an appropriate response to this question. So as we navigate down to the plans section, so we have two questions here. The first question is getting at identifying your local, regional, state, any watershed plan that's applicable to your project. And the I button here is going to call out a couple different examples. So what I would emphasize here is that just because your project was identified in 25 individual plans doesn't mean you need to identify all 25 plans. I would say that identify the plans that are the most relevant and the most applicable to your project. And think about a time scale. If a plan from 2004 or 1999 just may not have the relevance. And so again, you're kind of diluting the importance of the other plans that you want to highlight that may be more relevant, it may be more applicable, it may be more time sensitive to why you want to do your project. That's important because the next question is going to ask you specifically what are the actions in that plan that your project is addressing. So if you list 12 plans, you are going to then go ahead and identify, where in those 12 individual plans this project was identified. And so I'll say that we had some back and forth about character limits. And so when we went through and did the changes in the application, we immediately looked at all the character limits and just cut them in half. And we did that because just because we say that there's 8,000 character limits allowed doesn't necessarily mean we want 8,000 character limits. Um, and so I think there's a fine line of, art and science in kind of telling your story, because I think that's what these applications are. You're telling your story. And your story should be direct, it should be succinct, and it should be specific to what you're trying to articulate. And so one of the places that we got some feedback on when we did the testing was we initially had this plans question at 500 characters, and some of our external testers and said, you know what, that's just not enough. We need more. And so we boosted it back up to 1,000. But again, I would really, be mindful of just tell us what the most applicable, appropriate, and timely plans are specific to your project. And I'm going to check in with Liz and see if I missed anything or if there are any questions.
We do have a question in chat. Are the changes or updates that were made the same across all the applications, or do they vary for each one of the applications?
That's a great question. So some sections they are the same and some sections are different if the questions are specific to that offering. So a good example would be this problem statement question is going to be the same in all four applications. The project history section is going to be the exact same in all four applications. The plan section, this is going to look the same in technical assistance, engagement, and restoration. I think there's only one question in monitoring. So to answer your question, some of the sections are going to be the same. Some of them are going to be different because they're specific and relevant to this particular offering. And when we go to proposed solutions, we have a question about design alternatives that will be only in the restoration application because it is specific to an alternatives analysis that folks would do prior to implementing restoration. It's a good question. Hopefully that hit the mark.
I think it did. Yeah, we got a thanks.
Super. Okay, let's go to proposed solutions. So right off the bat, we ask you to identify the goal of restoration at your project site. And so a couple things I would say here that a goal statement is really just that. It's one or two sentences long. Um, it's your elevator pitch. It's your opportunity to tell us why you want to do your project. What we started to see over time was that people were giving us paragraphs in the goal statement. And really, I think what is the challenge here is that we've seen some of the goals become diluted with folks kind of starting to elaborate why they want to do this project or actually how they're going to do this project. That all comes later on. And so if the goal of your project is to correct fish passage at two different locations along this particular creek, it could be just that simple. If your goal statement is to restore 400 acres of stage step habitat to remove threats to promote sage grouse, it could just be that simple. It doesn't have to be a long, elaborate paragraph. It should just be that, one or two sentences. And I would take the stance that if you develop a good goal statement, the reviewer is going to say, that's cool. How are you going to do that? And we want to learn more. And that's going to trigger the review team to, be excited about continuing to go through the application to understand how you're going to do it and how you're going to achieve that goal. So again, there is an I button here. It's going to tell you the criteria that is specific to this particular question. And it's also going to give you an example for how would be a good way to answer this particular question. So after we identify our overarching goal, now we're asking you to tell us exactly how you're going to achieve that goal. And so this is our action section. This was previously called objectives. We changed the term to action. It felt a little bit more reflective of kind of what we're asking for. It's an action. It's the art of doing. And so list a specific quantifiable action to achieve your goal. So if your goal is to restore 400 acres of sage steppe habitat, one of your actions could be to remove phase one juniper from 400 acres. That would be a quantifiable action. And then the next question is, how are you going to actually implement that action? A response could be, we're going to hire a contracting crew, they're going to use chainsaws, they're going to cut, lop, scatter, um, and so forth. So this is the high level. This is the quantifiable action that's going to help you achieve that high level. And this is the details of how you're going to actually do the implementation. And you can see the character limits are reflective of the type of detail that we're looking for. So 500 character limits doesn't go very far. And it really shouldn't go very far because these don't have to be elaborate things. Now, when you're actually telling us how you're going to do it, that's going to take some detail and some explaining. So that's why you see the 4,000 character limits here. And again, the I button language is going to give you that evaluation criteria that is specific to this question. And then there are a couple examples in here that are, applicable for what would be considered a good response in this question. And so as you're kind of going through this, you can identify as many actions as you need to implement your goal. And so what you would do is you would just click the plus button here, and it's going to continue on action one, action two. We call this the repeater function. It's the same two questions asked in each one. There is no limit to how many you can add, but I would be mindful that just make sure that it's applicable and appropriate to implementing your overarching goal. So as we kind of go down here, we've identified our goals, we've identified our actions. This section is, so getting back to the question about, are these the questions the same? So this question is only in the restoration application. And there was an iteration of this question asked in the previous application. We cleaned it up a little bit and hopefully tried to make it a little bit more clear on what we're specifically asking for. But essentially is we want to understand what alternatives were considered as part of the process and why the preferred alternative was chosen. And so you'll see there's 6,000 character limits on this one. When we went through our planning process, the review team member that was a part of our group really emphasized how important this question can be from a review team member's perspective, because this really helps the review team member understand, what other alternatives were considered and why the chosen alternative was the one that is going to be chosen. And it allows the applicant to really, dig in a little bit and help tell that story of, hey, we looked at this and we looked at that. We vetted out these different alternatives. And really what it came down to, we decided to choose this. And we chose this because. And this is a great opportunity to kind of help tell your story on the process you and your design team went through to consider different alternatives and how you got to the point to identifying what specific alternative was chosen and why. And again, there's the I button here to help kind of provide some high level guidance on kind of what we're looking for in this particular question. Again, It also has the evaluation criteria that is specific to this question, and then an example of how is a good way to answer that question. Um, so the next part of the design section is to really select your level of design. Now, some restoration projects don't need or don't warrant a design, and that's okay. You just select no design is required. Um, if you are selecting conceptual or preliminary, and this is getting at what is the level of your design at time of application, if they are only conceptual or preliminary, there will be a pop-up question that will ask you what remaining work needs to be done in order for your design to be complete. This is really important because it helps tell that story on, we're only at conceptual, but this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it to get to that final design. So hopefully that is more clear. I know this was worded a little bit differently in previous applications, and it was still, even from a lot of us at OWEB's perspective, it read a little wonky. So hopefully we changed this to provide us the level of design at your project at time of application. Um, so if you click preliminary, that question is going to pop up again. And your project might be just fine with a conceptual preliminary. And if that's the case, tell us why. If you select final design, that question goes away and you don't need to answer it because your design is complete. Last question in the design section. This is not a new question. In fact, it might even be verbatim from the previous application, but it's just talking about how you're going to minimize impacts to adjacent lands during project implementation. And we do have the I button guidance here. And so this is, again, telling us what specific criteria is appropriate, and then what would be an example of how to answer that question. So the next part of the application is one of those that's going to be in every application, and it is new. This was a pretty exciting part of being able to do because we initially had two tables in previous applications. We had the project element table and we had the project management table. So the project element table you would identify the task, you would identify a little bit about that task, and then the dates. And then the project manager table later on in the application would kind of tell who was involved and their expertise and their qualifications. And when we were going through the process, we thought to ourselves, wow, it'd be really cool if we can kind of combine these two tables. And I think that will be a lot more impactful to one, from an applicant's perspective, to tell that, kind of broader work plan story of what the action is, who's doing it, what their role is, what their qualifications are, and then what the start and end date is. And I think from a reviewer's perspective, this kind of provides a fuller picture of who's involved on what particular tasks, what are the dates associated with those tasks. And I'll also say that as you're kind of going through this, when you think about your actions here that you identified in your work plan are going to be the same actions that you identified up here, um, there should be a really clear line for the actions you identify up here, the action that you identify in your work plan, and your associated budget. And so there should be a really clear crosswalk between those. So the reviewer gets a full picture of this is what we're going to do, this is why we're going to do it, this is who's going to do it, and this is how much it's going to cost. And the clearer you could make that line and connection to those items, the more clarity the reviewer is going to have in understanding those elements, what you're going to do, who's going to do it, why their experience, and how much it's going to cost. So I would highly encourage, as you kind of go through the application, to make sure you kind of draw that really clear line between goals and actions above, your work plan, and your budget. Okay, one last, and you could add as many records as you want, similar to up above, and these really should be reflective of the actions you identify above. Now, I know it'd be really slick if we were able to take the options up above and they would auto-populate in this table. I agree. I think that'd be really cool, but the technology limited ourselves to be able to do that. So um, hopefully it's not too much of an onus to reinstate your action here as you kind of go through. Okay. Now we talked a lot about removing metrics in the application, and these are the only remaining questions that are relics of the metric questions from the old application. So if you'll recall, there were 5 different sections that you could select. You could select one, you can select all 5, whatever type hits your project. So we are asking folks to identify the different habitat types they are working in. If they were to select any of these, they would then be asked, if you're doing in-stream habitat, what are these categories that you're going to be working in? Let's just say that we're going to be doing fish passage, we're going to be doing fish screening, and we're going to do some in-stream habitat restoration. Um, Now that's it. Now in the previous versions of the application, there would be a ton more questions that would pop up, and you would be prompted to provide us specific metrics associated with these. So now we're just asking you to check the boxes. And really what this is for, if your project has an anadromous species connection, you may be asked to report metrics when the board makes award of your grant. And if that is the case, our reporting staff can use the checks that you put in this application to better prompt you to tell you exactly where in the metrics database you need to input your metrics. So this is just a checkboxing exercise. Definitely hit all the ones that are applicable and appropriate to your project. Um, but you won't be asked to input any metrics here. But in the long run, this is going to help our reporting staff work with you in the future if you have an anadromous species connection and if you need to report metrics to us. Um, so that is the one lone relic of the metrics section of our application. And I want to check in with Liz and see if I missed anything or if we have any questions.
We don't have any questions in chat, so I just remind folks, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in chat. And I think I would just highlight a couple of points that Greg made that are really important. One is under the actions section. You probably noticed that he mentioned more than once, make sure you do quantifiable actions. And the reason why that's important is without the metrics, since we're saving the space and removing the metrics, that was a place where I think a lot of applicants would put the numbers for their project. They would put it in the metrics section. Without that section, we really need the numbers. We need to know the acres, stream miles, linear feet, whatever those quantifiable metrics are. Make sure to incorporate them into the actions so that the reviewers can get a sense of the scope and scale of what you're restoring. The other one I would highlight is in the work plan table, again, just emphasizing what Greg said about tying all these pieces together, the actions, the people, the budget. And an example of what we mean by that is if there are staff positions or contractors that are in the budget, then they should have some element in this work plan table. That's what we mean by tying these together. So that, you know, if there is, so that reviewers can get a sense of, okay, I can see what that staff person's doing. I see what their role is with the action, and it's tied together in this table. And that can really help them get an idea of that broader context of the project. And so that's the value of the table, is it just ties all these pieces together so you can see the whole project story together in one place. So it's really helpful to put it together. And I still don't see any questions in chat, so I think we can move into the next screen.
Okay, wonderful. As we scroll down, after we did all our check boxes under habitat types, our wrap-up section. And so off the bat, we're going to start with our benefits. So this question here. We had an iteration of it in our last application. We really Honestly, you wouldn't believe how many different iterations of this question we actually developed until we landed on the one that you're seeing on your screen. There must have been at least a dozen versions. But this is really your opportunity to tell us those fish and wildlife benefits, those watershed benefits, those water quality, those water quantity benefits. And this is your space to elaborate on what those benefits are as a result of implementing your project. And so this is your bragging rights. This is to tell us why this project is going to benefit the species, the habitat, and the landscapes of the places that we live and work. So I hopefully you see this question as a really fun one and a way to brag a little bit about the benefits of your project as a result of implementation. Again, you're going to see an I button here, and it's going to give you some high level overarching guidance here. And then again, the criteria that is applicable to the specific question, and then an example of how to answer this question. So this next one will certainly be no stranger to anybody who's filled out applications with us in the past. Will this project benefit salmon or steelhead? And this is now just a simple yes/no question. And so previous versions used to, if you selected yes, there'd be a whole diatribe of pop-ups that would have you identify the specific ESU, the specific recovery plan. If you selected no, you were given the opportunity to identify what recovery plan um, that you're working from to the species that you're trying to impact. Those are all parts of the application that were associated with metrics. And so, yes, we want to know if your project benefits salmon and steelhead, but we're not going to ask you any of those additional metric questions that we used to ask in the past. So hopefully that will be a lot easier for you all to just select yes or no. If you do select yes, um, then your project may have to report metrics when the board makes the grant award. So for the April offering, that would be in October of 2024. And then if that's the case, you'll work with our reporting staff on this new database that's being created, and we'll ask you for metrics. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward. The public awareness section, this is not new. We had always asked how the project will promote public awareness. I wouldn't snooze on this question. I've had a lot of review team members really take a lot out of this question, specifically how a project might aware different community members or adjacent neighbors. This is a really good question to articulate what those, public awareness opportunities are. And so again, there's going to be an I button here that's going to tell you the specific criteria, and then an example of how public awareness is being showcased in your project. And yeah, I would really take this question pretty seriously. And if you see some opportunities to raise awareness of the public, whether that be community members, neighbors, certainly we want to know about it. So yeah, answer that question with a lot of thought and intent. And then this last question here, over the summer of 2023, our board adopted rules to incorporate climate change and mitigate the impacts of climate. And so this is a question that is specifically generated out of our criteria. And so, we want to know how your project is engaging local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change, and how those folks may inform your project. And so I would definitely open the I button, because if you don't know what is considered as a community disproportionately impacted by climate change, we do provide a definition for what we mean when we say that. And so that's highlighted here on the screen. And then there's also example of how you could answer that question. Uh, Believe it or not, that's it. We went through all the changes that we did. The next section of the application would be optional monitoring. This hasn't changed. Of course, you can navigate these on your left-hand side too. Now, budget, funding and match, uploads. well, not necessarily uploads, but plant permit, road page. Certainly stay tuned on some future changes coming to those pages. Um, while we're here, I do want to quickly um, just say something about uploads. What we often see is that folks add a lot of uploads to their applications, sometimes uploads that are not directly relevant to your application. So just because you can upload something doesn't mean you necessarily should upload something. I would use the filter of it's going to help me convey my story, or if it's going to be provided basis of what I'm trying to implement, um, upload it. But I would be cautious, and I would use caution when you're doing the uploads. What we don't want is we don't want a PDF that becomes 300 pages. What we often see is that, if you upload a recovery plan, that's 100 plus pages. Most of that recovery plan is probably not going to be applicable to your specific project. Now, it is undoubtedly appropriate to get those specific pages out of that recovery plan and extrapolate those and upload that. You can reference that in your application. That's certainly appropriate, but I would just exercise caution as you use the upload button. We've noticed a lot of uploads coming through the system, and again, it just kind of dilutes the overall story that you're trying to tell when you upload things that just don't have any direct relevance to your specific project. um, it can just kind of help dilute the message that you're trying to get across. So exercise caution on the uploads. Um, what do you think, Liz? Anything else you want to cover here while we're in the
No, you
application?
covered our whole list, and there is no chat questions either.
Okay. Well, I am going to stop sharing the screen of the application. I'm going to go back to the presentation that I started with. I have two wrap-up slides, and then it looks like we're probably going to have some time left over, so we can, when we're all done, we can stop the recording. And if folks want to hang around and ask questions, we will be here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint presentation. Um, and we wanted to show this, Liz, just double checking you see my PowerPoint, right?
I see your PowerPoint. We do see the slide deck. It's not in presentation mode yet.
Okay. How about that?
Yep, now you're in presentation mode.
Now let's see if I can actually get it to go to the next slide. Hey, it worked. Um, so this is a slide that we started to incorporate into our package that we send to our review team members. And this is just a reminder that your application is the scope of work for a funded project. So when we think of what is necessary to have a full and complete scope of work, we want to know who's a part of your project, what parts of the project are they doing, where are you doing your project, why are you doing your project, what's the relevance, the ecological relevance in particular, when specifically are you going to be doing this project, how are you going to do the implementation, and how much is it going to cost. We're a grant funding agency. We certainly want to know how much it's going to cost, and certainly avoid lump sums as much as possible in the budget. I cannot stress how many times we have heard in review team meetings when there are lump sums that just triggers the review team to ask more questions. When you trigger the review team to ask more questions, they start to lose sense of clarity. When they start to lose sense of clarity, they start to wonder, are all these specific elements around your scope of work clear? If they are not, then you kind of have a picture like this one up above. I can kind of tell what it looks like. I can kind of tell what they're going to do, but I still have some questions on these specific elements. So I can't stress enough how important it is when you think through, is my application complete? Is it succinct? Is it clear? Is it direct? Is it specifically hitting all these components that culminate into a complete, clear scope of work? If that's the case, then we have the picture below. It's really clear what we did, why we wanted to do it, how much it's going to cost, who's going to do it, where it's going to be. All those things are generating a clear picture on what you want to do. So this is a new slide that we started showing and providing our review team members. And so we thought this was a great opportunity to share it with you. And just to remind folks that the application is the scope of work. And so also important when you're closing out and reporting on projects, we want to know how each objective that you identified in the application was implemented. What were the deliverables on each of those objectives? So just something to think about. Anything to add here, Liz?
Nope, you covered it.
Okay. Well, my last slide here is just a reminder of the webinars that we're doing. So we've already done technical assistance. Today, obviously, is restoration. We have two more for monitoring. Our effectiveness monitoring coordinator, Ken Fetcho, will be joining us. And then I also want to make mention that we do have these office hours, which is just, we'll be logged on. And if you have questions or just have some need to seek some clarity on items, just jump on. You can jump on, ask your question, and jump off. It's very informal. We're not recording them. It's just another opportunity for you all to engage with us so we can better assist you to submit competitive applications. And the Zoom links should all be on our website and on the Gov deliveries that went out. Of course, if you can't find it or need it, just reach out to one of your OWEB staff members that you work with, and they'll be able to provide that for you.
And Greg, we have a question in chat. Will an application template be provided in future versions to allow project partners to help with grant writing prior to upload to the final application? So I'm wondering if you have your application open still, maybe we can go back and go through the steps again, because it is kind of confusing with the long list of templates.
Yes, sure do. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation. I will reshare the online application. And so just double checking, Liz, you can see
Yep.
that. Okay,
Yep.
cool. So if you go up to templates, and you could be anywhere, you can be in an application, you can be on your home page of the online application, wherever you may be, you can get to this section. So go ahead and just click templates. And it's really important that you select version 2. So underscore V2, that is the current version that we're using. We call it version 2 because it's the new streamlined version that we are currently working within. Do not use this one. So you're going to have version 2 for restoration. You're going to have version 2 for technical assistance. You're going to have version 2 for monitoring. And you're also going to have version 2 for engagement. And I understand this is kind of convoluted. Almost every offering that OWEB has ever done is here. So apologize for that. But key takeaways are version 2. That's the version that you want to download. And so let's just go ahead and take a look at it. There actually is a couple things that is kind of cool if we take a look at the template. Since somebody asked, and Liz, I'll just double check that you can see the template.
Now, right now we can see your online application, and
Gotcha.
it looks like you're trying to click on a downloads. And you may have to actually share your screen again.
Got it. How about now?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, good. Microsoft wants to know the sensitivity label for everything these days. So this is the template that you would download. Just a couple things to highlight on a template while we're here. So here you have the question. You have the character limits that are applicable to that question. And then here in lower font and italic this is the I button guidance that's below the question. So if there is I button guidance associated with the question, it's going to pop up in the template. That was a pretty big lift that we did a couple years ago or a year ago. So again, it's going to say online restoration version 2 application template. Of course, we cannot accept templates as a submission. You have to submit online. I'll stop there unless anybody has any specific questions about the template.
Thanks for providing those templates and doc forms, so helpful. But I don't have any other questions, so I'm happy to stop recording and we can stay on until 11 and continue to answer questions. We can have a more free dialogue. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording.